Hello, it's Matthew Holt. It's THCB gang, although not much of a gang this time. We're doing one of our specials. As I told you when I was coming back from that long absence, we're mixing things up a bit, doing some individual ones and some gang ones and some variations. And today I have a special guest, Robbie Pearl, super well known around healthcare and healthcare technology. Um, just wrote a new book called ChatGPT-MD, and we'll talk a lot about not only what he thinks the future of AI in healthcare is, but how he wrote the book. He has his own very popular podcast, Fixing Healthcare, best known for back in the day being the CEO of the Permanente medical group, the whole thing, not just one of the individual units, and also these days professor of both the Stanford School of Medicine and Business, which have not actually merged. It's just a way I wrote it down. So, all right. Robbie, thrilled to have you back on THCB Gang. So you have been around and about in recent months talking about your book. I know you were at HLTH where I was. Oh, I didn't see you there, so well, there were 10, 12,000 people in the crowd, so somehow got lost. And I know you've been in a bunch of other places. But let's start. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, and you and I have talked much about, spreading the model of capitation, how we change healthcare overall. There's obviously some changes in the last week with the election, but let's start with what you have discovered in writing the book and where you think we are with the evolution of AI in healthcare now. So I'll just give you a platform to sort of spout where you think we are in the state of play and where you think things are changing fastest with AI, given the new book ChatGPT-MD, and by the way, all the proceeds go to Doctors with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. So great cause. All right, but spout, tell me.
All right. So yes, you're absolutely right. It's a crazy time right now. In the past 3 months, I either will have given between my keynotes and my podcast appearances over 100 times. So it's been I think
103 months. You might be running for
103
office.
months.
You have a
Yeah.
plane shuttling you between different
I
different
can do a
hangars.
couple, I can do a few podcasts the same day. So that's one way to go. But it's the number one topic by far in medicine today that people are asking about, interested in, and wanting to know about the future. So it's wonderful to be back with you. It's great to have the show back on the air. I missed it when you were gone
Well,
for a
thank,
while.
thank, thank you for saying that. Yes, it was. I was being beaten up by various people for not having it on, and now we're back with a vengeance. So
Yeah,
give
let me
me the
start.
sort of
Yeah,
greatest hits of where you think we are with AI. You've been looking at this a lot. You've written a book, so just tell me
yeah,
where you think we are with the greatest hits. What's the most
sure.
important things coming out of this AI revolution for medicine?
Well, I do need to start by pointing out that we should never use the word AI because it's so a broad category
Yep.
to differentiate the different types of AI. And I really want to differentiate. We can go all the way back to 1980s. Stanford wanted to come up with a tool to let doctors diagnose infectious disease and figure out the antibiotics. They came up with a rule-based system called MySin. And the problem with a rules-based system, or the way it's designed, is an expert creates the rules, and they do it the way we teach medical students and residents, heuristics, 4 or 5 rules of thumb, and that drives the performance. But we know that experience is better than any set of 4 or 5 rules that we can create. And so the tool never really gained tremendous adherence. But around 2000, the architects of AI technology realized that they could use biological principles, neural nets, multiple layers interconnected with each other, and do this in a way to drive the application to create the rules. And the way and I call it narrow AI works, is that it takes, let's say, 10,000 mammograms, 5,000 show cancer, 5,000 are normal or benign. And it finds between the two 60 or 70 different variations, assigns a probability factor to each, and is able to then diagnose breast cancer 10% better than radiologists. These are the ones that are FDA approved. There's about 1,000 of them, but they're narrow. You can't use a mammogram AI tool for chest x-ray, to say nothing about a brain scan or some other technique that's out there. But more importantly, a narrow AI tool is only as good as the data set that you give it. And when you're looking at visual images, it's why most of them are in radiology, pathology, skin lesions, retinal scans. These are pictures and they tend to be accurate. Now, there's a lot of issues around variation with skin color and other things, but overall, the sets are pretty, I'll call in quotes, clean. The challenge you have is when the sets are biased. And this is where you have tremendous racial disparities and inequities. And this was the big brouhaha that happened with Optum under United Healthcare when they were trying to find people who would benefit from getting a lot more investment of dollars. And they only found 50% of the people to be Black in the AI tool, 45% when researchers came in. But the reason was because in medicine today, doctors practice biased medicine. What we know is that they give $1,800 less care to Black patients than white patients, prescribe 30% less pain medication to Black patients. And COVID did less testing, and on and on and on. So when the data set is bad in a narrow AI tool, it amplifies the problems. It's why Watson could never use the electronic health record as the means to be able to provide diagnoses to patients. So that's narrow AI. Generative AI is completely different, even though they share the same two letters. Generative AI starts with scraping off of the internet and every other place you can find information. And by the way, medicine has a surfeit of information, far more than we're using today. 97% of the material coming off monitors at bedsides are thrown away rather than being applied. It uses that information. It knows everything in every textbook ever written. It knows everything in every journal article ever published. It doesn't start with the human behaviors. It starts with what's being written. So it's aware of things like bias because it's in the literature that it has learned, and it can apply it very differently. I call the book ChatGPT-MD. By the way, I have no connection with any of these companies. I use ChatGPT-MD because it flows so nicely, but it could be Gemini from Google or Claude from Anthropic. It doesn't matter who it is. The technology, rather than being GPT, should be PTG. It's pre-trained on all this information, that it's transformed the T using parameters, 2 billion of them. Articles that are published now are better than 10 years ago. Ones from peer-reviewed are better than non-peer-reviewed. Academic centers are better than individual clinicians. And then it can generate an answer to every question. And it provides not just knowledge. You go on a browser now and you click on a lot of links, you get a lot of knowledge. You don't know what to do with it. Generative AI provides expertise. You can paint like a Rembrandt, even though you never had an art course. You can program a computer, even though you never had an IT course. You can create songs like Drake in the Weeknd, even though you don't play an instrument. And patients become empowered. This is what you have to understand. Every piece of technology up to now has been designed for the doctor. This technology can be used effectively by the patient. Now, you asked me what are some of the most important pieces. I want to go to what I think is going to be the biggest piece, which is that if you ask me why are healthcare costs continuing to rise 7 to 9% a year when overall inflation is 2 to 3% for next year, for now and for next year. If you ask me why so many clinicians are burned out, my belief is it's the crisis, the explosion in chronic disease. Now, why do I say that? You see someone with right lower quadrant pain, you diagnose appendix, you take their appendix out, you see them 5 times. As soon as a patient walks into your office with diabetes, and by the way, it's 1/3 of Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic, you now have to schedule 120 more visits over the next 30 years.
Right.
Total different level of demand. That's why doctors are seeing patients every 17 minutes. There's just way too many patients for our ability to provide the excellence in care that is there. And I believe that if we can't control chronic disease, we're never going to be able to get our arms around the healthcare system. And on the other hand, I believe the opposite. The data from the CDC says that if we could control chronic disease, as well as the leading organizations do. When I was CEO in Kaiser Permanente, you say the Permanente half of Kaiser Permanente, we were able to control hypertension 90% of the time. This accounts for 40% of strokes. We were able to control diabetes 20% better. We were able to control all of the diseases that are there, able to control, prevent cancer of the colon. at a level that we were not able to do before. When you're able to control these chronic diseases effectively, the CDC says we'd reduce 30 to 50% heart attack, strokes, cancer, and kidney failure. Now ask yourself, if the US had 30 to 50% fewer heart attacks, strokes, kidney failures, and cancer, what would happen to our health and what would happen to the cost? This is the value-based care we've talked about for a long time. You lower costs by raising clinical outcomes, by improving quality, by preventing disease. I think chronic disease monitoring and management. Now, how will this technology do that? As you said, I teach at the Stanford Business and Medical School. Across the street from the business school sits the engineering school. At the engineering school, they have wearable devices that measure blood pressure, pulse, blood glucose, blood oxygen, 99.9% accurately. Not a single doctor that I know uses any of them. Now, why? Here we have a tool that is completely accurate and no one uses it because no one wants the data. Now, how absurd does that sound? Why don't they want the data? Well, the patient can't use it. You do 100, you see a patient, they have elevated blood pressure, you prescribe a medication. A month later, let's say you measure it 3 times a day, you have 100 measurements, 92 are normal, 8 are abnormal. I'm doing great. 92 are normal. I'm doing terribly. 8 of them are abnormal. The patient doesn't know. And find me a single clinician who wants 100 blood pressure readings every month from every patient. They don't exist. Generative AI is now able to take that using very simple mathematical statistical analysis, first and second derivatives. At the end of the month, say, you're doing great, Matthew, or you're doing poorly. You're doing great. Keep it up. I don't need to see you. You're doing poorly. I may want to change your medication. Let's set up a television. Let's talk on the phone. It doesn't matter how we accomplish it. We have the ability to do 2 things. Number 1, control chronic disease better. And number 2, actually diminish the number of people who come to the office because we can keep them at home better because they'll have fewer diseases that require a lot of medical care. That to me is the holy grail. It could never be done with any technology that existed. And as you know, November 30th of this month is the 2-year anniversary of this technology. And I want to let me add one last piece. It's doubling in power every year, at least, probably faster than that. 5 years from now, it'll be 30 times more powerful. Don't look at what exists today. What exists today is not ready for use, but anticipate, get ready for what's coming in 3 to 5 years.
So you said a lot, but let's narrow down the connection here between generative AI, ChatGPT, the ability for the computer to know everything and do everything, and its ability to manage incoming data. And can you compare? So for a while, I mean, you mentioned all the good data from Kaiser, right? George Halverson used to send it out in a newsletter called Be Well, about the impact that if you systematically approached a problem across an organization, you could get it right. You have lectured many times on how we don't systematically manage problems across the US healthcare. I remember talking about your dad and his death due to missing a vaccine and all the rest. Many stories like that, right? So we're not getting into that. But there have been organizations, Kaiser's one of them, there are others that have systematically gone after this. There have been approaches for many years, and Health 2.0 had a bunch of them. You see them at Health still, where pre-generative AI, there were people collecting these measurements. There were people trying to build population health management systems around this where they could find the patients who were out of whack on blood pressure, out of whack on blood glucose or what it was, A1C, and deal with them. And yet they didn't spread. Now, what you're saying is that, look, put this into an AI tracking sort of analysis tool. It's going to make it much easier. We're going to identify those people faster, quicker, easier. Connect the dots for me as to how I've given you Gen AI. Those systems didn't scale before for a bunch of reasons. Why? What is this the question? Like trading Bitcoin. Why is it different this time?
Yeah. Well, I think let me start with 3 parts.
Yep.
Okay. The first one is, how did we do it? How did we become number 1 in the NCQA? We spent a lot of money. We hired a lot of nurses. We hired a lot of pharmacists. Nurses and pharmacists are very good at helping patients with chronic disease manage their blood pressure, manage their diabetes, etc.
And
What's
manage
the
the
problem?
medications, of course, right?
It's very expensive.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Now, if it's very expensive, why did we do that? That's the second piece. Because we were not paid fee for service, because you can't charge enough for that. We were paid on a capitation basis. And if we could, as we did, lower heart attacks and strokes and cancers 30 to 50%, we saved a ton of money. So we could afford to do it, but it wasn't enough of a differential to make it successful, to be able to spread it. And the third piece to it is that even with all that information, you need to have an integrated care delivery system with leadership to accomplish it using the approaches of the past. So it wasn't that it wasn't good, it just didn't have enough differentiation to get people to take the risk, to make the investments, to come together, to change the reimbursement system. And that's why you're absolutely right. It's stalled out.
So let me ask you before we get to why this time it's
Sure.
different. There have been halfway house approaches, right? The most obvious one has been Medicare and now some commercial payers paying for remote patient monitoring, remote therapeutic monitoring, more and more stuff. You know, you see a little cottage industry, quite a big cottage industry actually, of organizations going to regular doctors out there in the wild saying, we can help manage your patients with cardiology or with heart disease or high blood pressure or diabetes or what have you, and we'll split the money and we'll figure it out. And, you know, there's also OIG has said there's a lot of fraud and stuff going on in that world. But, you know, nonetheless, that kind of halfway house has been established. We have ACOs, which are kind of approaching that attempt, you know. Is the changes we've had in sort of regulation and payment in the mainstream of American healthcare, is that enough?
I'm not
Does
sure
that
I fully
help?
understand, but what I would say is that the cost of doing it was too great. I wrote a piece for the Harvard Business Review a decade ago where I pointed out that you get better quality, you have lower cost, but your cost of doing it, paying the people, offsets that. And so you get a net wash around it.
Yep.
That's what's different now. You know, you can use ChatGPT and pay nothing. It's a free tool that's out there, and it's very reliable. There's a great study last month out of Stanford, and a lot of your listeners are not going to like to hear this, but I had nothing to do with the study, but it was published in JAMA, where they took clinicians and they gave them the kinds of vignettes that we always do on exams and learn from it. It took 50 doctors, 25 of them analyzed the vignettes using traditional material. We're talking about journals and textbooks. 25 of them used the same traditional material plus ChatGPT. And they gave the vignettes to ChatGPT alone. What was the outcome? These were very complex cases early in the diagnosis, so this was not the endpoint, required a lot of reasoning. Clinicians alone with traditional material, 73% accuracy. Add ChatGPT, it goes up to 77 or 78. ChatGPT alone, 83%. This is not the first study. Harvard did the same thing. They found the same kind of result when you compare this. And as I say, it's going to be 30 times better in 5 years. This is a very different tool than we've ever had where we could empower that patient, where we could be monitoring that patient at home continually, where we could differentiate who's sick enough that we should see them, but who's well enough that we shouldn't see them because they would have to miss work or school or something else. It's the power of the technology. I think that, and the cost, it's so inexpensive. Yeah, you can sell a very expensive tool that does it. You can have a home monitoring system. They all work. It's just that there's no profit in it, so no one gets particularly interested in doing so. You can get the profit in two ways. You get the profit because your cost of delivering the service drops so significantly. That is what the application does. ChatGPT 3.5 is free. Or you can get the value by capitation. But to do that, you've got to be able to bring people together, coordinate it, provide leadership. That's a lot of lifting. And so I think we've stagnated. It's a reason why life expectancy in the United States today is no better than 2010. 15 years. We've not yet made a significant advance. And I challenge you, because you're in this industry all the time, tell me a single technology that has been able to be implemented in medicine that has raised quality, that has lowered cost rather than raised cost. The operative robot? No. The EHR? No. Tell me a single example that you've come across where a technology has simultaneously raised quality and lower cost. This is the first time. And the reason is because we've detached it from being only inside the healthcare system. It's now a tool that empowers that patient sitting in their home, not once, twice, or 3 times a year, but every single day.
So let me ask you how you think that's going to play out, right? Because there are two things you mentioned. One thing you mentioned explicitly, one thing you mentioned implicitly, right? So one thing is tracking, measuring, monitoring, right? And we've been talking about this for a long time. As you said, it's been quite an expensive issue so far. You have folks like Peterson doing reviews of it, saying, "Well, this stuff we're selling to patients for diabetes or musculoskeletal is kind of a wash." As you said, it's going to cost more. If you look at the data around ACOs, the cost of putting in the ACO has exceeded the cost of the benefits, the cost benefits of putting of you're getting from it. So replace that with the analytics side. The other thing, obviously, that's coming, and I haven't really, we're getting there, and I want to talk to you more about the sort of Vinod Khosla theory, but is giving advice, companionship, coaching, help, whatever, from the machine directly, right? ChatGPT is a companion. Well, you've got ChatGPT-O as the early example of this. You can talk to it. It has a weird British accent I can't get rid of for the moment, but but
Yeah.
you know, where I could get the first one, right, quite easily. How are you going to get patients to use the second? How are we going to move the patient, as you're not just monitoring the patient, but actually get the patient to work with a machine, a coach? How do you think that's going to play out? And do you think the latter part matters? My guess is you have to move the patient as well, and not just monitor them. But you tell me what you think is important.
I think the market is moving faster than we in healthcare want to acknowledge.
Mhm.
I can't find a doctor these days where I go give my talks who's not using ChatGPT. And I'm finding an increasing number of patients. The data says that it's already 1 in 6 who are using it to get a diagnosis. You know, a couple of months ago, I was on a podcast. At the end of the show, when the cameras came off and the microphones were shut, she said, Robbie, you're a skier, you're a doctor. My husband fell 3 months ago. His arm was over his head. He slid about 100 feet. His shoulder still hurts, so he can't use that side as well as the other side. What's going on? And I said, you know, I think I know exactly what he has, but why don't you go home? You said you've never used ChatGPT. Go use the free version, 3.5. Put all the symptoms in place. Put as much information as you can and see what happens. She calls me 5 days later. She says, thank you. She said, ChatGPT said it was probably a rotator cuff tear. He needed an MRI to establish the diagnosis, and he should see an orthopedic surgeon because he almost definitely needed a procedure done. Now compare that to a search engine. You'd get 80 different diagnoses of shoulder pain, another 40 different ones of why arms don't work as well as the opposite side. It's likely to tell you you should see an orthopedic surgeon, not to tell you what you need, but to protect the company doing it. And she saw the surgeon, probably rotator cuff, MRI confirmed it. And he said, if I had delayed the surgery, I'm not sure I could have reattached the tendon to the bone. The muscle would have contracted. Now think about how different that is than the American healthcare system today. This doesn't threaten doctors. It shouldn't threaten doctors. It means that your patient's going to come in with an expertise. With Google, they came in with a 100-page printout because they couldn't differentiate the links that were misinformation from real information. This is going to be the best knowledge out of medical textbooks and journal articles. And understanding that, and particularly coming out of the peer-reviewed journal articles. So all the stuff is going to be stripped away. That's the craziness that you often find online. And I think it's not going to be hard. Now, having said that, Matthew, I do believe that we need to have every doctor shouldn't have to teach their patients how to use this stuff. I mean, come on. This is not particularly complex. If you have a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old, just ask them. They've already figured it out. But if you don't, how do we have a link, or do we have material or a YouTube that you can go to and watch it? Why shouldn't it be created by a national organization, CDC, NIH, the NCQA? I just spoke at their conference. I encourage them to do it. How about the large medical societies? It takes about 10 hours to really learn this. But I think most people are going to want to do that. And you made a really important point earlier when you pointed out the 4O. Because when it was just text messaging, there are people in demographics who are going to resist that. But if you can just talk to someone as though it's their doctor, I mean, at some point, someone's going to make it your doctor. It's going to sound like Dr. So-and-so. In fact, NVIDIA, as you know, along with Hippocratic, has talked about a nurse bod. Now, it's a nurse bod, but it could be a clinician bod because it also does the same things. And by the way, it's $7 an hour.
Right. So let's talk about that part, right? So do you think that, so by the way, next month I'm having a THCB special with Dave DeBroncart, Hugo Campos, and Gilles Freeman, and they're, as you know, they're aggressive e-patients when there was just Google. Now they're very aggressively going into ChatGPT and AI, and for self-diagnosis. So I think there will be both, Susanna Fox has mentioned rebel health, patient-led movements in this. There does need to be a sort of mass socialization of it, whether it's, as you said, whether it's the CDC or whether it's, I don't know, who, some large consumer organization with some trust, the Red Cross, God knows who, to do that. Maybe it should be the medical societies saying, here's how you help patients do it. I want you to talk more about what you think how you think it could work for, whether it's the conversational ChatGPT or its equivalents, or whether it's text or whatever it is, where the sort of companion / monitor is going to help people. Because a lot of what we're talking about in terms of, especially as you know, diabetes, heart disease, a lot of this is about behavior change, right? It's about medication management, taking your meds, all that kind of good stuff. It's about diet, it's about exercise. It's all the classic stuff that it's almost impossible to get people to do. So how do you think that is going to, and also obviously tracking outline results. How do you think when we move from, instead of people trying to figure out diagnosis to get into the right spot, which is a big deal, I'm not saying it's not a big deal, but so day-to-day management, how do you think that's actually going to play out? What kind of systems do you think either the current healthcare system or emerging healthcare providers of whatever flavor are going to put into place to achieve that?
Well, you're really raising two approaches to the disease, and we combine them. One is a medication approach and one is a lifestyle change. And I think we need to separate them. It's not one or the other. It's going to be, how do we maximize both to some extent? And they're slightly different. I think today we have the tools to very effectively use medications in most patients with chronic disease. The great example to me of that is what we've done with patients on anticoagulation. This used to be a massive problem. Patients are getting the wrong dose, bleeding, getting clots. And we gave it to a pharmacist who's able to do it just as well as doctors. If there are doctors out there who believe that they're better than the pharmacist, I'd like to hear from you, because the data says you're totally wrong. The pharmacist can do it perfectly. Hypertension, for most of the patients, man, until they get 4 or 5 medications, it's pretty much we know what to do. We have a common definition of hypertension. We have the medications that work, and there's a sequencing that we're going to accomplish. ChatGPT knows all those things. It can do those things if we want them to do it, but more importantly, at least initially, what it's going to do is to be able to monitor you. Once you're wearing, if you have diabetes, then you have a glucose monitor already, and it can use that data. If you have hypertension, maybe you have an electronic cuff where it can give you a wearable that's going to do it, or the Apple Watch soon will do it. Doesn't matter. The generation of this data is not going to be the hard part. And it can look at that continually. Now, we then have a question. We can allow that data to go to the patient specifically, and when it tells the patient, you need to call your doctor, you're going to call your doctor, or it can go to your doctor. I mean, there are pieces of this that we're going to have to evolve. But the idea that says I got to wait till you go back to the doctor's office in 3 or 4 months, and then when your blood pressure is elevated, we say, oh, you have white coat syndrome, come back in 3 or 4. No, we will know. It can figure out first and second derivatives. Is the blood pressure going in the right direction or the wrong direction? Is the blood glucose going in the right direction or the wrong direction? In fact, it could actually tie it in with other things like diet. But having said all of that, that's where I think it's going to do that monitoring. And the truth is we can do a really good job. It's just expensive right now to do it through people. The technology can do it for us. Now, lifestyle is a different question. And you're absolutely right. We don't do a great job around it. But I'm not sure we do a really good job of supporting patients. We tell them what to do. Every Sunday night, my wife and I sit down and we say, what do we want to eat this week? Well, last week we went to a bunch of meetings, ate a lot of cruddy food. This week, let's have a healthier diet. We just finished a week of a lot of hard work. Let's take it a little easy this week. Whatever we want to tell the device, it will give us the menus, the shopping list, the recipes. If you want to do when I go to a new place, I ask, where should I run? Because I'm a big runner. Whatever you want to do, if you're motivated, it's the support. Will that give you motivation? No. But will the clinician conceivably, with more time, be able to provide some incentives to use this tool? I think that it will. I don't think we're ever going to solve all the lifestyle issues because our lives are too crazy. Society's too crazy. But I think we can do a better job than today. But I don't want to go either or. I want to get the medication really good and then say to the patient, you could be on a lot less insulin if you could lose some weight and if you could do some exercise. You could have fewer problems with hypertension if you could change the amount of salt that you take in, or whatever we as clinicians think is the connection of these two. So I think we have those opportunities that are there. And I've just spoken about one little tiny piece. I always start with the chronic disease because that's where I have the CDC data that says 30 to 50% fewer heart attacks, strokes, and cancer. I think the applications will be just as much in the hospital at home, acute diagnoses, medical errors. We can go on the list of pieces. As soon as you start to understand that this technology can take data that we ignore today, fill in the gaps, and be able to anticipate something in the future and prevent it, you start to understand how powerful it can be at transforming American medicine.
So let's talk a little bit. I want to get into I do want to get into how you wrote the book and how you worked with ChatGPT. Before we do that, one piece I want to ask you about, which is the sort of the pacing of this. So if you were to look at, correct me if I'm wrong. If you look at how this is impacting clinicians today, the first thing I'd say, number one with a bullet is helping them in their current workflow. So ambient AI scribing seems to be, coming on a pace. A little bit of controversy about that. I've now seen the first papers saying, oh, this is, there's too much hallucinations and you can't trust this stuff. A little bit like after about 5 years of EMRs, we said, well, they're not that good at fixing medical errors. But it's clearly a big deal almost come out of nowhere and really impacting a lot of clinicians right now, and changing lives, looks like for the better. We'll see. You can start to see more and more analytics happening. You mentioned, some of the things you're doing, but there are lots of companies now going in and looking at analytics around things like, as you said, sepsis for inpatient care. A bunch of other places as well. You mentioned the Hippocratic AI and some of their companions doing kind of like the intake and the patient education part using avatars. Give me a sense of where there may be some others that you've looked at, of the things that you would notice as a clinician and clinician as a patient that are happening now and going to be happening very soon before we get to this sort of mythical patient companion helping you with medications or whatever. Where do you think it's now, and where is soon, in months rather than years? What do you think is the big impacts that are here already and are coming?
Well, I think the ambient AI, which is the tool listening into the conversation between the doctor and the patient,
Yep.
and creating the EHR, 5 years from now, it's going to be hard to find a doctor who's not using it.
Sure.
Might
be less than 5 years, in my opinion, but that's, it's not happening. Might be less than 5 years.
Well, it's going to grow. I'm just saying by 5 years from now, you can't find them. They're going to be, maybe there's 3 of them somewhere, sitting somewhere in the wilderness. I have read the articles about some of the criticisms, and I want to comment upon it because I know this is an area of your interest.
Sure.
I have not seen documentation about hallucinations in that context. Why is that? Because why do the hallucinations come? They come when you generate a question and it doesn't have the information. It is designed to answer every question. That's one of the challenges. By the way, there's now a deeper version where if you're willing to wait a little bit longer, it will check itself to make sure it's not hallucinating. It's just that it takes a little bit longer to accomplish all that. But I am not aware of hallucinations sitting inside the EHR. But let's even assume there was a hallucination in it. What's the problem? The articles that I've read imply that somehow either the EHRs of the past or the current ones are great. They're not. The old ones were never available. The old ones never had the information you need. And the new ones, they're copy and pasting. The idea that they drive analytic thinking, you're 50 years out of date. I hate to say it that way. Hey, the doctor tries to get through the day as fast as possible, never looking at the patient. We don't look at the downsides of how we practice. And we criticize the technology because it's not perfect. So I have not seen anything, like yourself. I get called probably by 50 different companies over 5 years in the past. Every one of them said the same thing to me. Said, Robbie, we have a great AI tool. This was a narrow AI tool. We have a great AI tool that saves doctors 3 to 4 hours a day, but no one's buying it. Can you consult our company and tell us what we should do? And I said, yeah, I can consult right now. Your product isn't any good. Because if it saved 3 to 4 hours a day, your biggest problem would be managing the crowd outside your office, trying to get it before your office opened the next morning. Yeah, it didn't work. Now it works. It works very well. And actually what it's able to do that's interesting to me is that it actually can separate out person-to-person chatter from the electronic health record. If you say, oh, I had a great birthday party with my Aunt Sarah, it doesn't go in there. It's figured out. That's not a medical issue. Now, again, is it perfect? No. Is it much better than anything we have now? Absolutely. So that is an example of where I think that it will go very, very quickly. The stuff that's further down, the challenge is going to be what I said earlier. If the financial system does not support it, it's not going to work. But what are some examples of things that I think, I'll call it to me, there's as you say, now a 5-year and a 10-year. The 5-year from now is nursing. If you look at a hospital, it has 3 parts to it. It has the ICUs, different kinds of ICUs, high intensity monitoring, people at your bedside all the time, 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 at worst, nurse to patient ratios. In the middle, you have what's called telemetry, tele. This is a nurse sitting at a monitor looking at a variety of screens of patients that are out there. Every clinician loves to have their patients on tele because it, in quotes, feels safer. It's very expensive. Every hospital administrator fights back against all those requests, a constant battle going on. It's not that we don't think it would be helpful. It's just that, again, we can't afford it. So what do? We have monitors at the bedside. We know that some people are going to develop a complication today that's going to land them in the ICU in a very severe condition. And when they go home, they have a 4 times higher mortality than if they never go there at all. Every one of them has these monitors at the bed. It's almost impossible to be in a hospital not attached to a monitor. And we, as I say, there's a terabyte of data every year, 10 with 14 zeros, 97% of which we pay no attention to. Why is it there? Because if you die, we'll know it. That is what we set. We set our monitors basically around death, either because your EKG straight lines or your blood pressure drops so far, or depending on whatever the monitors or your pulse stops reading. Most of the time, by the way, it's because the monitor came off. But that's its design. What do we want to know? We want to know the transition. We don't want to know when you're dead. We want to know 2 hours earlier so we can come in, intervene, and stop you from having the crisis. But we don't have enough nurses to do that. Now, why don't we have enough nurses to do that? Because of every 100 patients, there's only maybe 3 who are going to go into this situation. And monitoring 100 people doesn't become possible. Now imagine a generative AI tool taking all that information and telling you, maybe not the 3, the 7. Now it doesn't take very much resources. The same thing, by the way, with hospital at home, or all the, I'm sure, there's 100 nurse to the home kind of telemedicine services you've consulted on and companies you've seen. They have to do the monitoring for everyone the same. No. Who are the 10 out of the 100 patients who are potentially in trouble? How do we use our resources there? How do we leverage what we're doing? It's not going to eliminate people, but how do we leverage it in a way that what before had been a equivalency in cost, dollars invested against dollars saved, now shifts that so that the dollars invested drop, the dollars saved rise, and now we have both a very effective health tool and a very effective business. To me, I think it's a 5-year piece. Now I'll give you the 10-year, which I think is the scariest of all. So specialists on the line should probably hang up right now. If you look
they
at
have 10 years to plan their retirement. Come on. They can invest in NVIDIA. Oh, that was last year. Sorry.
This is really, it could be 20, but
yeah.
If you look at where we're moving right now, we are doing more and more things in the operating room and in the procedure room without touching a patient. We have operative robots. We sit 8-10 feet away. We have a image coming out of the patient. Because we're humans and not machines, we can't read digital images. We're not as smart as the machines. It creates an image, a visual that we can see. And then we move some levers that move some arms that move the operative robot. That's a classic large language model problem. Stimulus, response. Every time this happens on the screen, this is how the dials move. If we had a weekend that we could train the technology on every procedure done that day, we would actually start to have a tool that could augment, replace, pick whatever word you want, the surgeon. The same, by the way, if you have a heart attack, your coronary vessel is blocked. What do? We stick a catheter in your groin. That's 2 feet away from your heart. And what does that catheter do? You can't manipulate a catheter when it's being pushed through blood vessels 2 feet away. No, we either inject dye or not. We can see what's going on, and we then advance the catheter or pull it back. That's, again, a large language model. Now, when I talk with doctors, they often say, Robbie, you're out of your mind. Medicine is so complex. So now I want to ask you, which is more complex, driving a car in San Francisco without a driver or doing what I just described? In San Francisco, balls are rolling, dogs are running, bikes are flying, signs are moving, it wins. It's actually a simple application. The hard part would not be developing it. The hard part would be getting people to accept it. And that's why I say that's much more of a 10-year or a 20-year. We have to understand that the human role is going to change, assuming this technology keeps doubling in power every year.
So on that last one, I'll just give you an example. So last week I was at a conference, the Behavioral Health Tech Conference in Phoenix, and that's the other place where Waymo is powerful. And you now can now get in the airport. They fixed the bit which it used to be weird to have to open the back to put your suitcase in. You can now press the button rather than having to do some weird stuff with your phone, which didn't work for me last time. So last time I had to shove the case into the back seat with me, but now the trunk of the fancy Jaguar opens, drives you off. It does fine. It has its moments. I took it maybe 5 times over the course of being in Phoenix, and once it went to the back side of the hotel I was in, not the front side. Had to walk around. But basically it's more or less perfect. It can't get drunk. It doesn't speed. It has to deal with crosswalks. Maybe it can't go outside the geofence, but in terms of, and it's cheaper than Uber, right? For now. I was struck by the irony, right? I would show up and there'd be panels on, well, AI can really help us in therapy, but it's not ready to replace a therapist yet. And just like you said about surgery, I mean, surgery is pretty complicated, but robotics are already helping. People are talking about putting stuff using AI around the therapy. Can we do a better diagnosis using chat? Can we do a better back office support? Can we do better billing? But a little bit of the therapy, well, we need that therapeutic alliance between the patient and whatever. And I'm going, CBT, processing therapy, all these different therapeutic techniques, they're pretty much standard. There may be some variation from them, but, surely a machine can do that pretty well. So just in mental health particular, and mental health is a great area where we have mass increase in demand, but not enough therapists and psychiatrists. So Is that the place where this happens first, or do you think people freak out about the nature of, well, I can't be treated by a machine?
I don't think it's going to be freaking out by people. I think people are, the data says, there's a lot of data on this, that actually they are very, once they get used to it, they're very, very accommodating. It's going to be really around the regulators that's going to determine where things go. But I do want to offer the following thought. I've given a lot of, I'll say worries to people. We're going to need all the doctors and all the nurses we have. We are short today. We're short 100,000 clinicians. 70,000 are retiring every single year. Demand is going up. If all this plays through in some way, we're talking 30 years from now, by the time we actually get all the demand down and we get all the supply up and all the other pieces sitting in play. It's not going to happen very, very quickly. Mental health is another great example. We're very short. And we're short in two ways. We're short because there's a lot more mental health issues, challenges than we have people who are trained. But it's also short because people don't have the money. Because very often it's either not covered by your insurance, or it's inadequately covered by insurance, or the people taking care of you can't, don't take insurance. It's a lot of different reasons why.
Right.
We have a massive, massive, massive gap. And I think of these tools at every point as filling in when the human is not there. It's filling in a nurse between 8 a.m. when he or she makes the rounds and noon when they come back the next time. It's filling in between the doctor's office visit and 4 months later. And in mental health, it's the same. I think the tools will be able to do good mental health. It will not replace, I don't think, that primary mental health expert with whom you rely upon. It will not replace your doctor completely. It's going to change the relationship. Just the same way that ATMs have changed the relationship in the banks, but it hasn't eliminated the need for a human being, because that relationship, even though the technology has been shown actually be quite empathetic in certain arenas. If I have cancer, I'd like to talk to a human being. If I have a problem, I want to be able to deal with another human being for that. If I have a mental health problem, I'd like to know I can also connect with a human who has the same problem. They haven't just learned it out of books and other places that are sitting there. But what about in between? I see you, Matthew. You tell me you're having some depressive things. And I say, I'm a little worried about, have you ever thought about suicide or something? And no, I'm okay. I'm still a little worried. I'll see you back in 2 weeks. What happens those 14 days? We have no idea.
Right.
Just imagine if we could again understand what's going on with your mental health status. If I could know earlier. That's getting a little worse. It's this change that we've not understood. We have a point, and it's the first and second derivatives that we have to start understanding. If you're getting worse in depression, I need to see you right away. I need to make a determination of whether you're a suicidal risk. If you're starting to hallucinate things, and I don't expect that you can. The first time I see you, you're hallucinating because you have schizophrenia. Okay, a week later, you're still seeing things. That's what I expect. But at some point, if you control and now you're starting to see things, something's not working. I don't know if it's the medication you're not taking. I don't know what's going on in your life, but this is what I need to have a human intervene. And instead, what do? We replace it with a calendar. I see everyone every 2 weeks. I see everyone every 3 months. I see everyone. No, I want to see the people who are having more depressive symptoms. I want to see the people who are hallucinating more. I want to see the people who are feeling tremendous increase in anxiety, whatever it's going to be. And then I also want to recognize the fact that we do a terrible job, if you don't have much money, getting you care in this country. And maybe a tool like that, an application like that, isn't as good as a human, but it's better than nothing. And today we are giving so many people in this country who could use the help nothing right now. So I'm optimistic in these areas. I don't think it's a perfect improvement. It's not going to displace human beings, but it really will augment things. And I think what we need to do is acknowledge the shortcomings. And having acknowledged the shortcomings, and there's so many in the health system, then ask ourselves, how do we apply this technology in ways to address the shortcomings? After we do the shortcomings, we can walk about the longcomings. But the shortcomings are the ones, the gaps that are there, and we don't pay attention. We assume between our 2 visits, the patient's fine. We assume between the 2 therapy, they're doing fine. And the truth is we're often wrong.
Right. No, I'm definitely with you on that. I think I think there are some areas of mental health where actually it might take over. But there are obviously, as you said, there are many people who are not getting stuff at all because they can't afford it. There's lack of supply, what have you. And I think certainly with some of the simple things, and if we got it right societally, we could of course redirect, the tools and the AI stuff, to the AI technology towards the people who are standard and don't need it, and redirect the humans to the outlying cases, which, where they need more help. All right, we don't have a lot of time left. I want to switch to the business of writing a book with AI because I know you did this. So, and the other day I was actually at this mental health conference, and a very nice psychiatrist, she grabbed a bunch of, I was complaining, saying, well, it doesn't write like me yet. And she grabbed a bunch of my articles, fed it into ChatGPT 4, and had me ask it questions. I said, it doesn't quite write like me yet. What did you do when you wrote the book? How did you use ChatGPT? And in terms of, being a digital twin of Robbie Pearl as an author or as a speaker, or Matthew Holt as a speaker or an author, which obviously are different styles. How do you think that is playing out for the amount that you write?
So as you noted earlier, I've had 3 books: Mistreated, Why We Think We're Getting Good Healthcare, We're Usually Wrong, Washington Post bestseller, was on the system of medicine, Uncaring, How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients, was also a bestseller out there. But they both were done with a major publishing company through a traditional process, and it took 2 years. When ChatGPT came out and I realized that we finally had the tool that we needed to transform American medicine after talking about it for 6 or 8 years, I knew I didn't have 2 years because the technology is changing so fast and doubling so fast. I had to get this book out in 6 months. And
Oh, Mike, let me interrupt you for a second. I taught a class last year using Eric Topol's Deep Medicine, which is published in 2019 or 2020.
Yeah.
So out of date. I mean, no knock on Eric. I mean, there's no way he could have done it. But the stuff he was talking about, was the state of the art in 2020 was like paleoglyphics on the wall.
Well, as I said, generative AI is completely different than all the other AIs. This is not just an evolution, it's a revolution. It's a completely different approach that's out there. So that's what I said to myself. I said, how can I use this tool? Number 2, I said, this is a new tool. It was barely out when I decided to do this. I better learn how well it can work. So I came up with this idea of making it my co-author. And I approach it the same way I do with a medical student or a resident who comes to me and says, I want to write an article with you. Now, in this case, again, remember, ChatGPT is really smart. I said, I want you to read the 1.2 million words I've written in the past. So that's how it knew how my brain worked, because it could read a lot of my material that I wrote. It knew how I wrote, so it knew the style that was sitting in place. But then I had to go back and forth with it many, many times. But again, just like with a resident or a medical student, I'd write the draft or they'd write the draft. And if they wrote the draft, they would try to get it in my words, but they never got it quite right. And if I wrote the draft, I thought it was great, but they could always make it better. So this is the back and forth that happens when you have co-authorship. And that's what we did. I probably each chapter 30 times back and forth. There are 6 pages in the book that were written, I'll say 95% by ChatGPT. And I highlight those so the reader knows, just so they can see what ChatGPT can do alone. But ChatGPT alone could not have written this book, and I could not have written it as well as it's written in the time that was available without the help of ChatGPT. So this is the back and forth that's there. I will tell you that I fact-checked every statement that ChatGPT gave me. 30-page bibliography. I found one major hallucination. It came up with an expedition to the North Pole that I can't find anywhere in the literature. And if the people listening and buy the book, donate the money to Doctors Without Borders, can figure out what I'm missing, tell me so I can apologize to my co-author.
Well, I think pretty soon the North Pole's going to be missing if global warming keeps going. But
there you go. There you go. Anyway, so that's how it was written. But it was back and forth, iterative process. Again, truly no different. I might say to a medical student or a resident, hey, I think there's an article I read in Health Affairs somewhere on this topic about the impact of putting more dollars into primary care versus outcome. Could you pull up those articles for me and summarize them and come back and we'll meet in a few days? I'd say it to ChatGPT and it would come back in 3 seconds. That was the only difference about this and why the process got sped up. And then when it came time to publish it, instead of publishing it through a publisher, I decided I'm just going to put it on Amazon.
Yep.
Make it available to people I don't have to go through the printing and distribution of other parts. So everything was done to get it out there. It took 6 months rather than 2 years. And I think so far it's been the right decision. And I'm interested if listeners and viewers find things, disagree with things, read the book, just go to my website, robertpearlmd.com, and let me know. I'm always wanting to learn. But my conclusion at the end is, as we've said throughout this, it's not the answer, because there is no answer, but it is a major advance over what has traditionally existed.
So run that process forward, and you know where I'm going with this, because this is very relevant to the way we practice medicine, and also disseminate information as a whole, right? How far away, and you mentioned 30-time improvement in 5 years, and I saw a couple of talks about this. I went to an AI conference for lawyers in Seattle a couple of weeks back and saw some great talks. One of them was about the pace of change. It's almost logarithmic in the pace of change of these large language models. I mean, a lot of it dependent on, both ability of processing power and actual power. That's why Amazon are now buying nuclear reactors or whatever else, because we're running out of steam, literally, in some cases, and need to create more power. Putting that aside, let's assume that we managed to get there. At what point does the Robbie Pearl avatar come and do this podcast, and the Matthew Holt avatar does this, and we can be sitting on the beach drinking margaritas while this kind of content creation, is going on? You're already seeing that notebook LLM tool that Google put out. You give it some information, it sort of goes off and creates a show around it. But at what point do you think you're able to sort of not sacrifice? You're able to essentially say that the LLM plus the avatar is close enough to good enough as to how Robbie would have done or Matthew would have done normally, that we're about done. And maybe you can supervise and detune it later, but essentially that instead of having to go back and forth with it 30 times or whatever it is on each chapter, you're kind of done after the first draft. It's good enough, and it's a digital twinness, if that's a word. How far away is that?
The research on what a generative AI tool can do is that it tends to cluster around the mean or median. So what it's able to do is it's able to take all of the podcasts and be able to figure out what the hosts do. And you probably read about, actually, someone tried this. They fired everyone, and they actually had AI hosting people who weren't there, some of whom were dead. So
Right.
It's not that it couldn't happen. I would say it's mediocre. By mediocre, I don't mean mediocre, 8th grade. It's as good as the average podcast. And I'd like to believe that you and I do better than that. And if we don't, and if we don't do
Fingers
better
crossed.
than that, they should listen to a different podcast. I mean, that there is a competitiveness that needs to happen around this. I think the tool will be as good as the average clinician. Why is that? Because it's going to learn from the average clinician. Now, if you want to train it up on only the best, you're going to get something like that. If you do that around podcasting or film writing or music creation, yes, you can duplicate someone else who's really good, but you're duplicating someone. If you leave the tool alone to do it by itself, it's going to come up with something that's averages out all of those pieces. And so I think exceptionalism will always be there, but I think that mediocrity will get displaced.
What and translate that to, and the people are trying to build this, like, can you build a digital twin? So you now have the best doctor in pick your field, and they're doing consults. Can you twin them so that they can be seeing 50 patients where they now see one? Do you think that's a realistic sort of front end for potential for this? Do you think that part of the avatar or part of the support for an average doctor or an average clinician will be having the, Mayo Clinic / Stanford / whomever best specialist in the world, in that field? Do you think that's a likely addition? And do you think that we'll see, if you like, branding / service delivery based around that, as opposed to going to see your average doctor?
I want to differentiate two things, and this is where maybe I'm off kilter for some other people. I do not believe the purpose of generative AI is to see more patients in a day. I think the purpose of generative AI is to see fewer patients a day.
Yeah.
But spend more time with them. seeing the right patients every day, the ones in whom you can make a big difference. Because I think we waste a tremendous amount of energy on the things that we do now. Now, having said that, I think that, yes, I don't think these tools will be better than the average doctor. I think these tools will make the average doctor as good as the best doctor.
Okay.
And they will also improve the best doctor. So you'll have a positive reinforcing cycle going forward. Now, why do I say that? Because if you tell the tool who to learn from, and you tell it to differentiate from everyone else, not the data set in narrow AI, this is within generative AI, the prompts that you give it, it will figure out what those people do that's different. And to whatever extent we really want to believe that the best in the world is the best in the world, and we could debate that a lot, because I have a lot of questions about the people who we think are the best, so they really are the best. But you certainly could look at the outcomes. You certainly could take something as complex as prostate surgery done with an operative robot and recognize that the structures we're worried about, which is a pair of nerves that sit there, as well as some blood vessels and the cancer itself, is exactly what this technology can accomplish, but it's also what the best surgeons are able to accomplish it. And by learning from those surgeons, it can help other people to learn as a consequence of that. You know, it's interesting to me when I look at medical errors in hospitals, as you said, my dad died from one, and it's an area of big focus of mine. Johns Hopkins has shown we know what to do. There are hospitals that have not had a central line infection or a hospital-acquired pneumonia in an intubated patient for years.
Yep.
What is it they do? In that case, we know it's a few simple steps that we skip over. And this technology can observe people and make sure they don't skip those steps. They can make sure that whatever's done in the safest hospitals, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish right now. If there are some people able to manage chronic disease at the 90% level, why shouldn't everyone manage chronic disease, assuming they're the same population of patients? I want to be clear about that. Some populations are harder, but assuming it's the same population, everyone should be able to get to 90%. Well, 90 tries to get to 93, but everyone should get up to 90. Same thing I would say there. If there are hospitals that have consistently had no complications that are preventable, how do we use this technology to understand it and help everyone to get there? I think if we look at the opportunities that exist in medicine today, I don't believe it's by paying people less, and I don't believe it's by forcing them to see more patients. I believe it's by elevating quality, minimizing errors, finding ways to educate, teach, and support. And I think this technology will be a powerful tool for that going forward.
All right. We're over time, but I can't leave you without asking about what just happened, right? We've had a election which, you know, has most of us clutching our pearls and panicking and checking our New Zealand passports and God knows what else. But and we don't know what's going to happen, who's going to run HHS or the new version of ONC or CDC or what have you. We know that there looks like sufficient craziness going on in the rest of the appointments we're going to see from the Trump administration. Do you think, on the other hand, it does look like, you know, you have Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and others very influential in this, and they've been at the forefront of using AI and using data and what have you in their other areas. And if you're going to come in and talk about changing the federal government, you can't not look at changing Medicare, Medicaid, because it's just such a big part of the whole thing. And, you know, there have been influential voices like yours and others out there talking about how to sensibly use AI. There's now, you know, community around health AI. There's John Lampkin's very involved leading that, et cetera, et cetera. I know it's only speculation, but do you think that the change in politics is going to be a help here, a hindrance? Do you think it's going to make any difference? How do you think, you know, based on the little that we know so far about what's going to happen next, how do you think this is all going to play out in healthcare?
I think it will make a tremendous difference. Whether it's good or not, that's a different question.
Okay.
Well, no, I say that because I think that people have proclivities in one direction or another. This administration, I suspect. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr. is an anomaly because he actually goes in two directions at once. But everyone else, I think, is going to be moving towards supportive business. It's going to be moving away from regulatory restrictions. It's going to be moving towards a lot more flexibility. It's going to be moving towards a lot more personal accountability. And I think we're going to see that spread out across all the decisions that are made. I think Medicaid will be in big trouble because I'm someone who believes that we should have a consistency of care, because if not, states are going to skimp. Some states are going to skimp on it. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see a greater block grants going there. We're going to see, probably, rather than the states that have approved Medicare expansion getting the money and the ones that haven't getting none of the money, we're going to see the money pooled and distributed more broadly. We're going to see health plans that have less required full coverage of all aspects of care. We're going to probably see work requirements put on the Medicaid population. We're going to see the agencies with less regulatory intensity and more greater innovator. It's an innovative entrepreneurial direction. And again, depending upon how you interpret that, depending upon how much you see individuals versus groups, how much you see economics versus communities, how much you value diversity across states. I believe there should be uniformity. You're going to have a different interpretation of what's done. And this, I'll tell you with 100% definite. Half of the nation will think it's great and half will think it's terrible. That I guarantee you. But what actually plays out across time, I think you and I can have probably a very common opinion about what it should be, but we'll have to just see and evaluate that, I would say, in a broader context.
Do you think it increases the likelihood of the stuff we talked about for the last hour happening sooner? Or do you think the technology and its implications are relatively independent of the politics?
I think it will allow someone outside of healthcare to grab the reins and run faster. I think inside healthcare, it's going to be very slow for some of the things that I have said. And I think we're more likely to try to solve the problems through added efficiency and restrictions of costs in certain parts of the program than to solve it by elevating the health of the entire nation. I can't see Medicare, as an example, making big changes. Yes, they're going to move towards site neutrality, probably, maybe. Yes, they're going to be able to try to get Medicare Advantage programs to do some nicer things than they may have done in the past. So there are some pieces that are likely to change, but Medicare is such a valued program. This is a politically driven administration. They're not likely to make that change. Medicaid is where I think the big impact's going to be. And if I had to make a really out of the box thinking, there's my view that it's actually going to try to move healthcare into HSA coverage, because I think that HSA aligns with the financial and political thinking of the current administration. This is a means of moving dollars out of the tax system into a pre-tax system, investing it through banks and venture and private equity in a way that generates value theoretically, and then funds the healthcare that's out there. It's one that I think will be favorable to the people who are supporting the president at the highest levels, and be more problematic for people who have a belief that we should have exactly the same healthcare for everyone in the nation, or that healthcare outcomes should not depend upon socioeconomic or ability to pay coverage.
All right. Well, that's a forecast. I'm not sure I disagree with you, and I'm not sure I think it's good. But there we go.
I didn't say it's good. I just said it's going to be different. Be very clear. I don't want to be quoted on that. I haven't said in any way it's good. I am going to say change definitely will happen. Medicine will be practiced very differently, but I think it will be less control. It will be less equal, and depending upon how you see that, will determine whether you think you're in the half that thinks it's great or the half that thinks it's terrible.
We'll get a verdict, I guess, in 4 years. All right. I have been talking with Dr. Robbie Pearl. He is among many other things, is the author of ChatGPT-MD, available on his website at Robbie. It's robbiepearl.com. Was it Robbie Pearl MD?
My website's robertpearlmd.com.
robertpearlmd.com, and you can Google him. Listen to his podcast, Fixing Healthcare. Robbie, thanks so much for your time. We'll look forward to seeing all of those listening to the healthcare blog next week. I will have the THCB gang back together with a big group coming back next Thursday at 1 p.m. And all available obviously on Spotify and Apple podcasts. And I want to thank Robbie for his time today and say that exciting world's ahead of us. And we'll see how it goes with the whole AI, AI evolution revolution, which is happening as we speak.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you for hosting the THCB gang.
Thanks so much, Robbie. Nice chatting with you, and we'll see all of you listening next time.